Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Ogti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
Hi, my name is Aaron Ogti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area. I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hey, Aaron, great to be here today. And thanks, everybody, for listening and watching.
Great to be here as well. So our last couple episodes, we were kind of going over our deal day, week, year. And one of the themes that we kind of figured out, like kind of trying like duly self-introspective, was a big theme was because we have started our own business, we can set our own schedule and set our own calendar. We were sharing what we do, but we want to try to relate what we do personally to advice that we'll provide to both clients and anyone else listening to this conversation. So we are aware that not everyone can do the same thing that we have talked about because they haven't started their own business, so they don't have the same kind of time freedoms that we have intentionally built in our lives. So as we kind of reflect on that, and like, one, are we just kind of being obtuse, or are we actually able to provide tangible advice? But Trishul, when you think of our last couple of conversations, how much do you think is from that idea of entrepreneurship, the fact that we have built businesses that give us these freedoms and flexibility, versus just time control, just having kind of control of your own calendar and schedule that theoretically others could implement as well, even if they hadn't started their own business?
It's a good question. Yeah, it did actually go through my mind as we tailed off on that conversation last time. And I just, first I thought about it from my perspective, where in the past I was in a career that was, focused on being in an office, in a corporate setting, doing the whole, long hours, salaried, over, not paid overtime, but, just it's implicit that you're working longer than the standard 40 or 45, 50 hours that you're contractually obligated to work. And yeah, I guess what was going through my mind is this a function of the career that I chose and the path that I chose? Or is it more related to the industries that I'm working in? Is it related to the specific type of positions that I've targeted for myself? Or is there something more general going on here, between a distinction of being an employee with a W-2 versus somebody who's self-employed and making, kind of carving their own path? It's a good question. I think there's a case for both to stand out in my mind.
Okay, so that's a good way to frame it, because I'm going to give like several different examples that we might come back to throughout this conversation, where I think about, especially a lot of my clients are in tech. My wife has been an engineer. She moved into management, so she's always been a W-2 employee. Most of my clients are also W-2s. But there's this, let's say among engineers in tech, they, especially early on, they tend to have that same mentality of like putting in lots of hours. And they're kind of doing coding problems at night. So maybe not just an industry thing. Second, like, they also have a pretty strong reputation for showing up at like 10 a.m. or later in the office. So like, now they work more hours, but they kind of like shift their entire day. And as long as they're getting all the projects done, all their superiors are happy with the work, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And especially if they all shift, it works out well there as well. Other things that came to mind were when I first started, very early on, right out of college, I was in more of a sales position, where I was just, again, I was working for an enterprise. It is trying to acquire clients as I'm learning how to be a financial advisor. I failed out of that pretty quickly, but it was intentionally like, I could, if I was successful in sales, I could design my schedule the way I wanted. And I have seen that with others in non-financial sales positions as well. Kind of like if you're bringing in revenue and bringing in money, you get more flexibility and freedoms provided to you.
Right.
I also think of lawyers I know that will start off at law firms working 60 to 80 hours a week, and then they want to go to either some kind of in-house counsel position where there's no longer a law firm, they are a lawyer for another company, or they might start their own firm where now it's not just being a good lawyer, it's being able to bring in business. Like you're like have a name or some other way for people to find you to hire you as their lawyer.
Right.
And so I think those are like examples to consider. And I also think of like medical profession as well, or because they're kind of on 24/7 depending on the particular role. Some can have a regular 9 to 5, others will go longer, others can get kind of creative with their calendar, depending on, again, what their role is and what they kind of service they provide.
Yeah.
So these are kind of some examples that come to mind of the like potential professions that may or may not have similar feelings to what you've described, of that like starting out working really, really hard.
Yeah.
And then you and we made a shift to being entrepreneurs and starting our own business.
Mm-hmm.
But other either potential shifts or mentalities or outlooks, but like anything, like given that like possible different career paths that fit some of these descriptors, anything stand out to you?
Yeah, it's certainly a lot to unpack here. And I guess where we might even start is, it seems like there's maybe rules of thumb or high level heuristics or just even general themes around this where you kind of get it. If you're an employee, you probably have less freedom and more structure around what you're required to do than somebody who is self-employed. That's kind of the very high level, always exceptions on either side, of course, but typically somebody who goes down the self-employed route wants that flexibility to make certain decisions that you can't necessarily make. Not all the time, again, just got to keep that in mind that it's not black and white here. But, that's a general theme. That's why people may start off as an employee and gravitate towards being self-employed. It's this notion of desiring more agency in what you're doing, in your life, in your career and whatnot. So that's the high level theme, right? And I think there's also this arc that, is quite common. This arc where people may start off being kind of like an apprentice. Back in the day, you're just learning the ropes and you're under somebody or under an organization and you're figuring out how things work and how things tie together. And of course, you're actually learning about the actual job and the industry and things like that. And it makes sense to have that happen in this type of employer-employee type of relationship. Then, as you get older and you start to figure out the bells and whistles and the little pieces and how everything fits together, then it might make sense for many people to want to transition to something that gives them more self-control in their destiny.
So this actually leads to kind of the first thing I wrote down when I was reflecting on our conversation was our age. Actually, I am 40. I believe you're like a year or two older than me. And I worked. I like to think I worked pretty hard when I was in my 20s. I was definitely starting off at like 60 hours a week, doing a lot of cold calling that I hated, but I had no problem, especially before kids, like easily staying an extra hour or two after everyone left the office. Like the office is closed, I want to get this work done. And I do think there's a combination of like I had less obligations, but also had the drive to try to better myself in my career. I had that ambition, and I feel like that might be one thing that happens to a variety of people in their 20s, kind of depending on career, depending on personality.
Yeah.
And then they get to a next stage of life, not necessarily the
Mhm.
next stage of career, but that tends to, like, in terms of time, tends to correlate where, okay, what's the next level that I want, whether both personally and professionally.
Yeah.
And so I do wonder how often okay, do people move into management because they know enough to like now teach all those other new younger employees?
Mhm.
I have seen for a lot of my clients, they kind of, the best phrase one of my clients use, that they've developed enough efficiencies at work where they can get their job done in 60 to 75% of the time that it took them 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so maybe they scale down to 25, 30 hours a week and they still get paid the same because they're still doing a great job because they
Mhm.
know how to do their job really, really well.
Yeah.
Whereas others, they want to keep getting promotions, keep growing. So they keep putting in that kind of time because they have that ambition.
Yeah.
And like all of these things require kind of self-reflection of like what you want out of kind of life and career.
Mhm. Mhm. That's a very good point. Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is there is this progression of an individual, right, over their life. And certainly earlier on in your working career, it makes sense to have that type of relationship where, again, you're the apprentice, right? You're learning, you're the employee. And then, yeah, as your career progresses, a bunch of things change, right? Of course, you learn more about your actual job, but you learn more about yourself and what you're comfortable with. And it does sound like, from that point, there are a few paths that you can take. Also, the other thing obviously is you get more stable financially, right? You have a cushion to take more risk. That's also one of the themes, right? If you're employed, you don't have to worry so much about all the little things going wrong with the actual business per se. But if you're self-employed, there's a lot more risk that you personally take on to get off the ground. So yeah, as far as the themes of going through and maturing in your career, there are a few paths that people likely end up in. They can still be a solo contributor, within a large organization and still be very specialized and, not even working in a large team. They just know what they do it well, and they do it day in and day out. And they're valued for that, meaning the company gives them that level of flexibility that they feel they deserve at that point, and they're comfortable with that relationship, and everybody's kind of happy. So that's perfectly fine, right? And then the other part, as you mentioned, is you could certainly start moving up the management chain within your organization and gravitating that way. Also perfectly fine. You get, that comes with its own benefits and risks and rewards that are important to consider. And then, the third one, as you and I both kind of chose, is to kind of just go off on our own and build ourselves that way. So I think, where you end up among those three choices and where you even start among, those three choices, frankly, it all may come down to personality, right? And comfort zone. And that can evolve over time as well, for sure.
Yeah, I as I'm trying to like clarify again, it's the lens of, was the advice we were giving in our last two conversations like not relatable to most of the world? And I think one of the things that I came to, and especially like when as you were talking, I was writing this down. I think most people who are listening to our podcast are probably already kind of hardworking, ambitious people who have had careers in the past. Like they're probably have not quite the same personalities, but something in one, either your or my personality relates to them. That's why they're choosing to listen. And so they have shown that kind of that ambition and drive in their either 20s or early career, kind of however they want to define. And so that's kind of like the baseline, and they're now at this stage where they might feel stuck. That's a word that I hear a lot of my clients, especially like new clients, talk to about me. Or like they've been working so hard for so long, and they have so many good things going on, but they got to kind of this point in their life where they have to keep working hard, almost like unintentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the conversations that you and I have are how to make almost a mindset shift to intentional life decisions of, yes, you have been successful in your career so far. How do we make sure that you are meeting your own definition of success in your life?
Mm-hmm.
And for some, it could be starting a business, but I know that there's other risks there. And like, that's a hard thing that it does not make sense for everyone. And so I do think all the advice we talked about previously would still apply to any W-2 employee. It's just, it'll have to be applied differently. And it's like, okay, maybe you need to negotiate for more vacation days and less of a raise, because you don't necessarily need more income, you need more time off. And like there's a variety of other things. I have some other thoughts I'll get to, but like does that make sense? Like, this would not apply to someone who's been a minimum wage worker in their 20s and now they have grown a little bit, but they still have to work their 9 to 5, save into their 401k for the next couple decades. It's almost like there's a self-selection bias in our listeners that I think the advice would still apply, where they have some options available to them in life, but it requires some intentional mindset shift.
Well, I think part of the distinction is those past two conversations where we dove into the ideal day, week, year. It's important to remember those are supposed to be an idealization for
okay, yeah,
and like an aspiration as well. Coincidentally enough, you and I, based on what we've heard from each other, have come a long way with those aspirations. Putting those points to work in our own lives, and we've highlighted that some of the things that have helped is that transition to self-employment. Yes, the working hard in the 20s, and all of these other things have got us to where we are, and we also realize we're not fully actualized, right? There is progress to be made, but for sure, we're not starting the journey either. This isn't our first rodeo on trying to delve into these areas. So you can understand for sure, depending on where you are in your life journey, you may be much further than where you personally want to be, where your idealization of your ideal day, week, or year happens to be. But that doesn't mean it can't be the aspiration wherever you are, depending on what you're going for.
That's a great point. And I think it reminded me of a conversation I had in the hallway at XYPN Live, where we go to a financial advisor conference, and all these are like everyone they put on stage is like sharing their success stories.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like people in the audience feel like, oh, I'm not as good as that other person. Like, I'm not as successful as an advisor, even though we have the same career. Like, and I almost feel like we needed a here's how I screwed up kind of thing.
Yeah.
So in addition to the ideal day week, but here's all the reasons over the last year why I haven't had an ideal day week or year.
Yeah.
That's a good point. It's a good exercise. But I do think that's part of our reflection and sharing that of if you get sick or your kids get sick, all of that goes out the window.
Right. Yeah. Look, also, if you hear anybody who's successful, you're going to hear the highlights of what got them there. And there could be a good amount of fiction there, right? It's that person's individual taking, especially if they're selling themselves, right?
Yes, that's true. That is true.
which of course that's a part of what we're doing here. So
Right. Yep.
let's not fool ourselves completely. But I was also reflecting on that, and I started to realize, what's led to the success that I've seen in my own life. It has been some of the things we said, working hard in the 20s, saving, and all of that. And then I also think, okay, that's been a good part of the career and financial success, but as far as my individual life success, I was kind of thinking through it. Was it some major thing? Not really. It was actually getting dozens and dozens of just little micro movement changes in my life into play and structuring it so that I could keep those things going on a perpetual basis. Getting my sleep under control, the exercise, that's the journey that we've talked about already. Getting my nutrition and my all those things, those are all little micro movements. And that actually probably contributed just as much to where I am today as, the career and the savings and, just all the other financial related things that we've already spoken about.
That's a really good point. Those are like sleep, health, like exercise, nutrition, like those can apply to anyone in any career. Like you have to there's definitely some trade-offs. Like if I'm going to try and play pickleball for an hour and a half, I have to give up something somewhere else.
Yeah. And it's not easy either. That's a big balancing act to get all of these things to coordinate each other so that you're not sacrificing something major along the way. It's tough.
Yes. And so there's like one of those like the micro thing. When you said micro, the first thing that came to mind was I think yesterday started blocking off my calendar for 2024. Like I knew here's a couple conferences I'm going to go to. I blocked that off. I also block off the day after the conference. And so it's one of those things that like I'm probably gonna be sitting at my desk, but I don't have any meetings. And so it allows me to catch up on things that I missed during the conference because I was out of the office. Or as I get closer, I can choose to let a client kind of book that meeting time because that just fits in their calendar, fits my calendar, and I have to be like intentional aware of that. Like I can do that. And every time I block off my calendar, like I always think past me. It's like, oh, I don't have any meetings today. Oh, thank you, Aaron, from last year.
Yeah.
And it's this idea like of creating slack in my system intentionally allows me to, client can't make a meeting. No problem. We can rebook it next week. I have enough little slack, and both they feel better, and I don't feel like anything gets missed. And so that was the micro thing that like just came to me because I was just doing this yesterday. But like, anyone could theoretically like block out those days in advance. Like, I don't want to work Friday after Thanksgiving. I've blocked it off this year and next year.
Yeah.
And so there's opportunities for that. But again, it's that like intentionally making my life in 2024 a little easier by doing that little extra work right now.
Yeah. So, as I was thinking through this over the last week, what I think I realized is it's those very small things like that, but there's literally over 100 of them. And I was thinking this even might be some episode we can take up later or something, but actually enumerating those things and realizing each of those decisions was an intention that was put in place for a reason. And it's not like it's set in stone, but it got there and it became solidified in my, daily routine as I move forward through life. And each one has helped me incrementally, just 1% in better, right? As that theme goes, just little nudges, as we've already talked about. And that's contributed so much because it accumulates over the decades. And this really just started way back after I graduated, where, you're a college student, you have no structure whatsoever. You sleep, eat whenever you feel, I guess. And you go to class when things make sense. I don't know, but the point is, I entered the working career and I realized I don't really have any structure, besides I got to show up and leave at a certain time.
Yeah.
And I started building this in very slowly, something I mentioned before, that if I want to do something, I don't do it till I'm ready to commit. And when I commit, I commit to it and give it a really a really fair take, right? I put my full effort into making that small thing happen, that small 1% change. If it just means going to bed at the same night every day, right? And since I started that, I've kept it up. And what I've kind of noticed is even the first 10 or 20, it may not make a big difference, but once you get to like 80 or 100 things, your life becomes very structured. It's that whole, discipline leads to freedom.
You have the freedom to do whatever you want, and you have more structure in your life than you did at any point.
Right. As long as you get these 100 things done. But that is kind of how my life is right now. But I feel like I'm the most free that I've ever been, right? Because you always have those feelings of you should be doing this, or maybe I should have done right. That it's the shoulds, right? And until I got past like getting like 80 or 90 things on that checklist, now there's no more shoulds because pretty much it's all handled, by those micro adjustments. And my point is, that's been a process on its own that's taken 2 decades, to mature. And it's not like it's not like the intention at the beginning was to get there as quickly as possible. It's always been the journey, right? Just realizing one thing at a time, even if it takes 6 months or 12 months to check off that one small percent gain, it's still worth it because it compounds. Once you get the 80th, the 81st is that much easier, right? It's 1% better. And I think that's made a good amount of difference over my personal life. I think we're off on a tangent, but here we are.
No, but this is helpful because this is again, this part I'm more confident is relatable to everyone who might be listening,
right?
If that makes sense. And like I think about that journey, and for me, there were a few shifts because I never thought I was going to be like starting my own business when I was younger. That was never an intent. The closest thing I remember in high school and college, I knew a CPA that when it wasn't tax season, she stopped working at noon every Friday. And like it's like every CPA now they go on vacation on April 16th because like there's nothing they can do. So, but they work so hard right before then. And like, I think I'd like that flexibility. That kind of time flexibility. That was always in the back of my mind. I think it led me to kind of more the sales side coming out of college. And when I was an employee, again, I worked till 5 every Friday. Like I never had that, and still was never like a true desire. But it was when I wanted to be coaching my kids' sports teams, and my oldest is now 12. So when she was 5, I started coaching her in softball. And that was, again, 1 day a week. I would leave early at like 2:30, 3 o'clock to go coach her softball team. And as she got older, they started to have practices more often. And I wanted to make sure I was there for them and kind of always been able to pick up my kids from school at least 1 day a week. And that was about the time I started to kind of realize that if I wanted this in that particular firm, the particular company I was at, I had to be on the revenue generation side. I had to be bringing in business to be kind of earn that flexibility. And that is a little more common in financial services specifically, where if you are not bringing revenue and you're a W-2 employee, you're much more likely working 9 to 5. It is possible if you have enough expertise that or you've kind of developed the efficiencies where you can get done in 30 hours, you get a little more control. But that was one thing I noticed for financial services specifically. But that was, again, more of a mindset shift about 7 years ago. But it took me like 3 years before I was ready to like, okay, I'm I'm leaving to go do my own thing now.
It's interesting. I had the same shift in my mind earlier in my career, like 2 or 3 years out, that even in technology, I noticed sales, right? It is where the money seemed to flow. And it's interesting because I started as an employee, you know, as you did. And it got me thinking, if I had to do it again, would I have been just as successful if I just started from the way beginning as an entrepreneur? It would have been a lot more risky. I would have had any idea what I was doing, right? I would have taken on a lot more risk. And, you know, frankly, I was a software engineer who graduated in 2002, right after the dot-com, you know, bubble burst.
Yeah.
Meaning, as we were seniors, we were all thinking, yeah, we're all going to start companies. We're all going to go out, raise money. People are going to throw it at us, and everything's going to be golden. So it was on my mind, even, you know, the notion of putting something together and building it, and, you know, and whatnot. And I ended up as an employee because 2002 is not the best time to go out and pick up a new technology venture at the dot-com space.
If you can go unpaid for 2 years, you could have made it.
Right. Yeah. And you know, of course, that does play into why you and I both chose to do this later in our career.
Yeah.
But the other thing that was going through my mind is I feel like there are two other themes going on that are more secular in nature. One is it seems like where would this probably come from? Okay, so Adam Smith, right? The one of the founders of like modern economists. Yeah, one of the more modern economists. But oh geez, when was he from?
It was like 1600s, 1700s. He was.
Let's see.
He's.
When was Wealth of
Nations? He's definitely like he's like a founder of modern economics, but
right, or the first.
He's like Scottish, I think.
Yeah, so 17 to 1800, 1790s when he passed away. But what was his book, Wealth of Nations? Yeah, Wealth of Nations, Invisible Hand. Okay, so essentially his main point was, or one of his key themes was specialization. The notion that if we have a limited number of resources and a limited set of skills, people should gravitate towards what they do the best. And if everybody does that, then you can get something that's better than the sum of the parts.
Yeah.
Right. If you and I are stuck on an island, you're great at picking coconuts, I'm great at starting fires. We both need those two things, but we both shouldn't do it equally. You should do what you do better. I should do what I should do better. We can trade and we can be better off. Right. So that was a strong theme over like the Industrial Revolution, right? That followed that. But what it really meant is now, instead of being in an economy where everybody was kind of on their own, right? You kind of think back to the 1600s and 1700s, everybody's kind of self-employed, right? You're a smith, or you're a farmer, or basically everybody's a farmer, or you're doing some sort of thing on your own, and you have a family business that everybody's running. But the shift with the Industrial Revolution that led through all of this economic growth was specialization, right? So in the US, the theme was, okay, how do we accelerate that? Well, now let's get the kids into schools. Let's educate them. Let's put them on a pipeline where they can learn about knowledge and education, and then further specialize in university, and then be a peg or a gear in a big machine, right?
Yeah.
So I think there was a strong shift in how labor operates, because if people specialize, they get this sense of security by being able to do something of value that can be leveraged by everybody. But that also meant you didn't have to figure out all the little other things, to manage your life. All you had to do is figure out how to do this little thing very well. And then what society is saying is, oh, we'll handle the rest. You don't need to figure out your healthcare or how your taxes are going to work. We're going to even take out the money from your paycheck. You don't even have to figure that out. You can also see probably why there's a strong incentive to have society shift towards W-2 workers, because the government gets their money, just right up front. It's already baked in. rather than self-employed individuals saying, hey, I got this much money, you can have some. Here you go, Uncle Sam, right? So I think that's a theme, and the how this kind of plays in is that's the path that I was brought up to follow, right? You want to specialize. You want that sense of security. You want to be that gear in the big machine. And that's how most people did it, right? They went to school, they went to college, they went to grad school or whatever, and so on. I think the trade-off is you just had to give up that understanding of the bigger picture, of being an entrepreneur. That's something that isn't highlighted as much as maybe older societies used to highlight it before the Industrial Revolution.
That's interesting. I've never thought about it as you have to give it up, but I think it has been definitely, I don't want to say not quite a stigma, but it's definitely like rephrased as risky. That's like there's security in going to get a job, but trying to start your own business is much, much riskier.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so here's my soapbox and tinfoil hat time. Okay. So, the theme I kind of see is it makes a lot more sense, for example, for the government to have employees who can, just have their money come out of a bigger corporation. It makes sense for corporations to have employees than people who can think on their own.
I'm more on that side than the government. I think it's more the corporations that have that stronger incentive. I don't think that it works quite as well at the government side. But
okay, here's the tinfoil hat component. I think regulatory capture has a lot to do with it, because it's the notion of you want to push the theme that being an employee is safer and better.
Okay.
You want to push the theme that there's no need to learn about finance because you'll get your pension. That your future will be taken care of by the employer. Why learn about money, right?
Okay.
You want to push the theme that you don't need to know anything about your healthcare because your employer will handle it for you.
Okay.
So all of these things that somebody would have to figure out on their own, it's all part of the employer now for, again, some reason, but I think there is a valid reason. It's definitely helpful for an employer to have employees who don't know about business and finance and figuring out their own benefits and managing that all. It's all taken care of. It kind of binds the employee to the corporation, I think, in a stronger way than if they were more entrepreneurial in nature. There's more to that, but I'm going to let you push back.
I want to add one kind of quick history lesson. This is like, and I'll have to I'm 80% sure of this story. The way that current benefits work is because during World War II, when there was a shortage of workers for companies in the U.S., there was a law saying you couldn't just increase pay for employees to attract the employees that are still in the U.S. because so many able-bodied males are going off to the war, and so there was a restriction on increases in pay. You couldn't poach someone from another company by just paying them more, but they could pay in benefits. So they started doing health insurance as one of the probably more common benefits. And so if one company pays you a salary, the other company pays you the same salary plus your health insurance, okay, well, that's a reason to go. Mm-hmm. And so that started in the 40s, roughly. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think, I also get probably on the knee. So that's the story. That's the one I'm confident of. On the naive side, I don't think there was any individual saying, oh, we got to keep the masses down and let's do this thing. Let's reform education to keep the masses down. But I do think there is enough implicit influence from owners and the capital. Okay, how can my business do better? My business would do better if I had a slightly higher educated workforce. And if the government can help with that education side, then it will help our business do better. And they get to go to school, and all the parents of like kind of the daycare aspect, the childcare. So I think there was enough kind of confluence of influences and incentives, not an intentional like got to keep the masses down, so let's institute public education.
Okay, so a few things. I don't think we'll ever know. We could read the research on this and try to infer it, but I'd say the general themes seem to strongly suggest that it's beneficial for the employers to have their health insurance come from the employer. And I think we've looked at this before. For the employee, I don't think that's a fair deal at all, because if you want to switch employers now, you got to make sure that all your doctors are covered, with the new plan, and you're basically shackled to this employer for a reason that really doesn't make sense anymore. Correct. And also, it keeps our healthcare prices high. It really does.
It keeps across the world. It's also why the retirement age is still 65, because that's when you get Medicare.
It has all of these other effects that, maybe it wasn't meant to be that way from the beginning by some evil cabal of people. But look, this is where we are at the end of the day. Yes. We have a situation, a system that does benefit employers, I think, than employees in that specific situation. I think it's also true from the education standpoint, to be honest. And this is something I've been looking into in more detail as I'm exploring education options for my own child. Frankly, the system that was set up was, frankly, we need some sort of structure to educate people. The best thing they could come up with at the time is following a transition from, the whole lecture groundwork that was in place, for many centuries before that, maybe going millennia, right? Where you have somebody who knows things with a bunch of people who don't know things, and, lecturing, but it was brought down to basically, kindergarteners and upwards, right? Eventually. And the notion is that's how we communicate information. You have somebody of authority saying, this is what you need to do and learn. And once you learn these things, you'll be very good at being a model citizen, right? Very good at being that cog in the machine. And again, more speculation. I can't even prove any of this, but it does disincentivize people from taking the risks that I think an entrepreneur would take versus an employee would take. It puts this understanding that if you want to know something, you got to get somebody to tell you, right? That's our education system. But the pushback is, and I'm going to let you definitely chime in, because I got to take the hat off at some point before I get electrocuted here. But okay, so I think going back to our educational discussion, one of the most important things that I think you can learn is how to learn. It's not the knowledge itself. Yes. And I think that should be the core focus of education in general. How do I learn something if I want to know something? In the past, I get it. You had to get somebody to tell it to you, but that's not true, anymore at all, by any means. If you want to learn something, there are so many paths to figure out it. You can actually have the world's best lecturer give it to you for free, from any of the top universities, or you can have some creative YouTuber tell you how to do it every step of the way. All these experts are sharing this knowledge so you can get it. The key is, do you have the skill set to learn things on your own, or are you fully accustomed to only learning things that have been fed to you, right? So I think that's part of the transition. And again, we could have focused on this for decades, but I feel like the current system is struggling to make that change. I think there's a status quo about this is how it's been done for millennia. Why can't it proceed for another generation or so?
Okay. So I did not expect this W2 versus entrepreneurship to go down to our education conversation, but I'm going to take it and go to another can of worms, because when you said you're looking into education for your daughter, it's like, okay, that reminds me of some of the parenting things I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
So, before that, I completely agree about the learning how to learn idea. That's actually, I was in college. It was either my junior or senior year when someone mentioned that idea. Like, undergrad teaches you how to learn, and grad school might teach you to do a specific thing, but like you don't necessarily go to grad school. Like, you can also learn on the job, but it's all like that self-directed learning idea
Mhm.
of, here's a subject, there's a lecture, but like you have to figure out how to learn the material yourself and then
Mhm.
display a competency. And it sounds like you think that we could bring that down and not have to wait until undergrad for college to start building those types of skills. We could bring that sooner, but now you don't have a like letter grading system slash SAT structure.
Well, yeah.
And
So this is very apropos to what's going on, today, in fact, or this month in my own life. For example, my daughter began her education in daycare, like most people, but
Mhm.
we specifically chose a Montessori daycare, and the philosophy there is you let the child's creativity and their own interests guide their learning, meaning less structure on, hey kids, let's all sit down and learn about X. Instead, you have all these activities spread out, and throughout the day the kid chooses what they want.
Okay.
And essentially the way this kind of grew is, this was a program that you did from 3 to 6, and then from 6 you transition to a normal school where you sit behind a teacher, and from that point on the teacher tells you what you need to know until you have your medical degree or whatever it happens to be, right? So this is the structure or the path, but the thought process is, if you can keep that level of creativity and engagement going to the point where a child can grow into an adult, then they're fully self-motivated by their own interests, and it's kind of like lighting a fusion reaction that can be self-sustaining. It can perpetuate themselves on from that point onwards. Here's the caveat. Original Montessori was meant for 3 to 6, so there hasn't really been a structured bridge till after that point.
Yeah.
So that's what we've been researching. We have since found Montessori programs that would take that theme and run it all the way till 8th grade. So that's something we're exploring. But
Okay.
the other thing that I've noticed since we've been looking in this area is we found other programs that are just getting off the ground with a similar mindset. And I'll pitch it here just a little bit because it's just on top of mind at the moment. But have you heard about Acton Academy? Has that come across your banner? So Jeff Sandeffer is a serial entrepreneur, 100,000 or billionaire, something around that order. He made a lot of money doing serial entrepreneur and some more money and other things like that. And he ended up founding an MBA program where he kind of wiped the slate clean and figured out what's the best way to create these creative minds for the business world. Same time, he had kids who started off in early education with a Montessori type environment, and they were about to turn 6. It was like 10, 12 years ago. And he solicited the best teacher in the country, sat down with him and said, okay, what do I do now? And I'm going to butcher this entirely, hopefully I'll get the theme right. There's a TED Talk where he talks about all this, but
Okay.
We'll link it. But the notion is, so he asked the teacher, okay, my kids are creative, they're excited about learning, they love this stuff. What do I do next? And this very highly renowned educator said, you need to get the kids into the system as soon as possible. Because if they have this taste of freedom too long, they're never going to adapt again. And he literally broke down. He's like, no way, this can't be it. This can't be the best that we have. And so he started this academy for younger kids. And the notion there is, it's driven by these ideas of quests, where from a very young age, you're given a challenge that you get to pick. And the kids work together and they create their own set of rules and their own, set of ideals that they're going to follow, and they vote on things and they push it forward, and they keep doing that and iterating all the way up through high school. Part of the high school curriculum is, before you graduate, you do 7 apprenticeships on your own, meaning you, high schooler, reach out to jobs in the community or, businesses in the community and say, I'm a high school student. I want to be an apprentice and I want to see how this works. Can you take me in? And the success rate is, according to him, is over 90%, meaning corporations and businesses are receptive to this notion. So by the time the kid graduates, he's gone out or she's gone out on his own volition, completely on his own. This is very this is not like the soccer mom or the tiger mom pushing in the background, but the kid has taken his own initiative to come up with 7 different things that he likes to do and has actually gone out and done them on his own volition. So a good percentage of the graduates don't even go to college. They might go straight to industry. His kids went to SpaceX straight away.
That does get to again, this is, I think, is more of a parenting thing. Like, my oldest daughter's 12, and I've, in the last year or two, kind of had to have conversations with her. Like, it's like, I love sports. I love my kids. I want to share my passionate interest with you. I signed you up for sports at 5 because I'm not going to let you to choose things. But when they get old, part of the reason I love sports is it helps keep me healthy, and it's something I have to work on and practice on to get better. And those are both good life skills I want to teach my kids. They don't have to be the same thing. If you can develop how you're going to figure out how to stay healthy and how to have that internal drive to practice something to get better, where you start off where you're bad and you incrementally start to get less bad, okay, better, good. Like, you need to see that improvement. And sports is a great example of that because you get immediate feedback on your learning cycle. But she's now old enough, maybe she doesn't want to play the same sports that I love. So I've intentionally had this conversation with her that yes, she can make those own decisions. My middle daughter has been doing origami completely by herself. I did 1 week of origami at some point in high school, something like that. We're like, oh, this is interesting, and then I was done. But she has looked up YouTube videos, learned how to do some pretty impressive things. She can do it at different sizes of paper to create a tiny, tiny little crane. But it's completely self-driven, and we're like, this is awesome. We're so supportive of that. And even as young as 5 or 6, my wife and I were intentionally kind of teach them about the phrase, the spirit of the rule versus the letter of the law, and trying to get them to understand the real world of here's why speeding's okay, but stealing's not, kind of thing. Or here's why it's important to speed. It's not important to speed. It's okay to speed a little bit, but you wait for the pedestrian crossing the street. Like trying to teach them about the not quite probabilistic, but the weighing of the risks and the rewards, that kind of thing. If enough people are going the same speed, then it's actually almost safer to speed with traffic than it is to go slower and go down to the speed limit. And trying to look for plenty of opportunities to think about that idea of the spirit of the rule. Why is the rule in place versus following the letter of the law? And my wife and I, we haven't told this to the kids, but we wonder, are we preparing our kids to be better adults, but hurting their chances of getting into college? And because I do wonder if college applications are those students who follow the system and the structure.
Yeah.
But I still want, my best life memories are from college and friends I had there. And again, that's where I learned how to learn. I genuinely feel I got a lot of benefit from going to college. I want my kids to have that similar life phase and life benefit. But I don't know how much I'm preparing them for that specifically versus preparing them to be an adult in society where they have so many choices.
Here's the tricky part. I feel like the way the conventional system is geared, it's all about checkboxes and using those checkboxes to get a distribution and to stratify people on that distribution so that we can, allow people to go in directions based upon where they're standing, right? That's what standardization examinations are for, right? To standardize everybody and rank them. And also the whole application process for getting into universities and going to the next level in all of these things, even it starts as early as kindergarten, right? Get into the good school or placing into the gifted program and placing into the accelerated and the AP, right? All of that, it's all about getting that check mark of saying, okay, you met that cutoff. And now there's so many check marks you need to meet that if you want to be at that top, exile of performance, there really is little room for freedom.
Yeah.
You have to have somebody who really is excelling in all of these areas to a point where I don't think any reasonable adult might expect that from themselves, right? That like the stuff you probably have to do to get into an Ivy League school, I probably couldn't get in, if I tried. And here's also why. I love learning. I hated school.
Mm.
And it's ironic, right? I did all of this education and it didn't mean much to me at all because I didn't like it. I didn't like the fact that I wasn't choosing what I wanted to learn at any given time. Whereas since then, I spent half my day learning just because I like it so much. And how is it? Yeah. So the tricky part is society is geared towards not wanting to give kids that level of agency so young to let their creative freedom drive them for the rest of their lives. Yet that may lead to the best outcomes overall, even though that takes on more risk. But certainly it's harder to do in the system that we've created because it feels a lot more risky. That's certainly why I chose the conventional path until I was absolutely sure that if this business went nowhere, I would still be fine. So there's a difference. Yeah. We're not necessarily geared. The society hasn't functioned this way since the Industrial Revolution.
So for me, like I loved school. I really did, and I think one of the differences is, like, as I think about it, it's like I knew how to get the A from the teacher, and each teacher was a little different, and like that was almost the game for me.
So that's a good question. Did you like the check mark or the star? Right? Is that what motivated you, or was it the knowledge that you were learning?
Oh, for I think that's probably like the majority is probably getting the A. Yes. It was. I can think of some teachers, some classes, some material that I genuinely loved.
Yeah. Right.
But I almost remember the teachers more than the subjects, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this was like going back to that when you first said entrepreneurship. One of the things back to the beginning of our conversation, like I remember thinking, like I would have a boss because like it's almost easier if there's someone telling you what to do.
Right. Yeah.
Starting a business, I've told other new advisors starting their business, like there's no one to tell you what to do. The hard part is there's no one to tell you what to do. And like, got to go figure out compliance. Like, okay, you have to comply by these state laws. What state laws? Got to figure it out. You can hire a compliance consultant. You can go read up on the law. You can read these other resources that will try to sum the compliance. Like, okay, now you have to do bookkeeping. Like, what's bookkeeping? You have to keep track of how much money you make. Oh yeah, that's okay. I see the deposits in my checking account. Okay, what about your business expenses? My business credit cards. I got okay, and you have to categorize that. It's like, oh wow, okay. And when I first started, I had two expenses per month, so it's easy. But now it's like, oh, okay, so I guess I need to hire a bookkeeper. How do I find a bookkeeper? Okay, you have to link your QuickBooks to their like. There's again like just so many things to figure out that have nothing to do with helping clients save and invest and plan for their lifestyle.
This is interesting for a few reasons. Frankly, I think you're a special case. I think I am as well, but for completely different reasons.
Okay.
For example, I recall, were you like valedictorian or something?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So you have this distribution that is designed for people who can meet the most check boxes, and you are awesomely designed to do that. But you're one out of how many people?
2,000.
2,000, right? So great. The system works.
That's a really good point.
But all those other people on the fat end of that distribution, it's not designed for them, to be honest.
Yeah.
Right? They have so much they can offer to this planet, but they're not going to excel at the thing that system is designed for, those check boxes. And for me, I personally didn't care about the grade or appeasing the teacher. I learned to do it well, right? Enough to I was like 10th, right? Not first, but enough to get by and do okay. But I didn't enjoy it because I really didn't care about the star. I just knew that's what I had to do if I wanted to progress to the next level. But what I'm saying is, I personally feel that I enjoyed learning the most when I got to decide, what I was learning. And I think for a lot of people that might be the case, but the current system doesn't give much opportunity to that. For example, in my high school and my elementary school, there were small snippets of opportunity where I had a chance to do something out of the box, and I just blew those out of the water. But they accompanied 5% of my grade, overall.
Yeah.
So it was such a de minimis amount, even though I did something that nobody would expect from, somebody of my age. It didn't mean anything because it's a fraction of a fraction at that point. It wasn't the check boxes that matter. So I think there's a few things. Yes, it comes down to personalities, right? In terms of what makes sense. But I think a good part of the system is leaving a lot of potential opportunity on the table for a lot of individuals.
I think I agree there's something there, especially like when I feel like I started my business. It took me like 3 years of like, okay, I need to go down this path of business development within financial services to have the lifestyle I want, because it's based on the age of my kid. But it took me again at least 3 years. And even the first 2 years, I thought I was going to stay there and figure out how to be a partner at my prior firm, because it still felt a little safer. There's some structure there, and I think you're right. It's I love school because my personality and the way school is designed, that's just a perfect fit. But when I started my business, I had to I see so much mindset shift in myself.
Yeah.
Of I wanted to make it work at my prior company so badly, so that there was that older senior partner there to just help me, guide me, here's what you should do to things work out. That to leave that, it actually, to be honest, my wife had to push me. She had to push me to do this, and I'm glad I did. And I've so many things I need to go learn to figure out how to figure this out. But I was genuinely scared. But I think you're right. It's that's there probably are a lot more people who wouldn't be as scared as me and would actually thrive in that kind of less structure, figured out kind of environment.
So in addition to that, you had mentioned you learned how to learn in university, right? It was a big part. What if you had learned that in kindergarten, right? What if that was the core thing that was focused on from the way beginning for everybody, not only you? Why wait to learn how to learn when kids already love to learn? They're already creative from the moment they're born, right?
Yeah.
They just love soaking up information. And then you send them to grade school and they're like, no, screw all that. You learn this and shove this,
So,
right?
so the biggest thing my wife and I talk about, she applied to be an engineer at UCLA. I applied to their math program because I loved math at school, and I had never been exposed to coding or computer engineering in high school. I didn't even know I could apply to the engineering. Like I had no idea. And it would when I took a intro to computer programming class in college, like, oh, this is awesome. I love this. Spent again that was one of those classes. Spent way too much time in the class to get an A+ because I was just loving it. It's like I'm like we joke like I should have been the engineer in the family. She should have been the financial advisor because she deals with people so much better.
Right.
But it's like I was never exposed to it. Like could I have switched at some point in my life if there was just and my high school just didn't have a computer science class.
Yeah.
So it's like it's I do wonder like if I'd been exposed to that just 1 year earlier, would that have kind of changed my like life path?
Yeah. So I don't want to push Acton so much because look, they're new as well. So if they started 50 years ago, but one of the things that they say is every child is a genius, right? Every child has this passion, this spark for something. For example, your daughter could take that origami, start a YouTube channel, and have a million whatevers, and never need to think about any other thing outside of that if she loves it so much, right?
Yeah.
There could be things around that. And part of what that requires, though, is a mindset of I can learn. I can figure things out. Mm-hmm. If I don't know something, there's a way. I don't need to wait for that information to come to my brain. It wasn't like you missed that day of school, so I guess you're not learning about the Industrial Revolution or, the Potsdam Conference. It's okay if it doesn't come to you. You can get it when you need it.
Yeah. Okay, I want to try to do this really quickly. Kind of finish up and wrap up. I finished reading a book called The Gap and the Gain. It's Dan Sullivan's one of the co-authors. I'll double check that. I'll put a link in. I might have gotten the name wrong. But it talks about this idea of like part of happiness is reflecting back on all the growth that you have made from then till now. That's the gain part versus comparing where you feel like you are now to what your ideal should be. Because there's always going to be a gap there.
Yeah.
And it just leads to the like cycles both ways of like if you continually focus on that gap, you feel like you're underperforming on like even though you've had so much success, you're like, it's never enough. But if you can always focus on the gain, like you've come so far, this feels great, and you get this virtuous cycle of positivity. And that I think like when I think back of like should I have been an engineer, it's like, well, maybe, but all the things that actually did happen, like I'm actually pretty happy right now. Like I don't need to have been an engineer to be happy now. So that's okay. I'm like it still worked out well.
Yeah. Well, if there's no free will, then there's no choice. I guess that's an older conversation.
Yeah. We'll go back, like we'll say it's the randomness, right? Randomness and chaos.
Yeah. The way I kind of come out. Well, two things. I put a title in there, W2 1099. We didn't even touch any of that. So that might be another conversation. But something where I kind of come out is 2 points. One, to your point, in terms of comparison, I heard this quote that resonated with me. Here's the quote. I'm going to butcher it again. The only comparison you should make in your life is to yourself from 1 year ago. And that notion is we always like to compare where we want to be or to other people. Grass is always greener, but really what matters is how far you have come in the last year. And if you didn't come as far, then you can use that information to reflect on the following year. And if you just iterate on that, that could be enough, right?
Yeah.
That might be all you need. The second point, as we're winding down is there's this notion that being an employee has benefited the society in general, that whole specialization notion. But what I'd argue, and what I've been arguing, is kind of two things. I think there's room for more of a less conventional path, more entrepreneurship in society that I think could lead to something that's greater than the sum of the parts. And I say that for a few reasons. I also see that because when I talk to my clients, I tell them, you're actually already managing a business. Your household is a business. You have your assets, you have your liabilities, you have your cash flow, you have your income statement. Your goal is to maximize your shareholder value for your most important employees, and that's yourselves, right? So the notion here is, if you're running a household, you're already a business. So I hope you know how to run a business well. And unfortunately, the standard path of being an employee doesn't tell you how to run a business well. You got to know these things. And you got to know about finance and healthcare and all the things that they tell you don't need to know because they're going to figure out for you. That's not true. If you really want your household to excel, you got to treat it like a business that's run like a well-oiled machine.
Okay. We'll figure out if we want to pick that part of the conversation up next time.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I think we've had enough for today. Good structure, like, it gives us more freedom later.
Right. Okay, Aaron, I enjoyed the conversation. I don't think we got to the title. We'll change it if anybody's seeing it. I don't know. I think we can do that. And thanks everybody for listening and watching. Do subscribe, share, and upvote or like, I guess.
Like, subscribe, and share. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. All right. Thanks everybody.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and has no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.